And welcome back. We are now entering the research corner phase of the show, which we do every week here on 90.3 FM WMSC Upper Montclair, the News Commons Radio Hour Research Corner edition. Sarah Stonbely, welcome.
Thanks.
Welcome
Hi.
again. We heard from you a little bit earlier about the police database. Now let's talk about some research. Let's get into the real nerd stuff. What do you want to start with? What do you got for us this week?
So this week I thought we could talk about 2, possibly 3 different articles if we get to the third, that have to do with the effects of the closure of local newspapers.
The loss of local newspapers.
This is kind of like a burgeoning subgenre of academic studies on journalism because I'm seeing more and more. These are both 2018 articles. More and more people are looking at, and you'll have like your media economists, especially, and your political science people using, sort of very sophisticated statistical analyses, half of which I don't even understand. But, sort of the point is that they're really doing it right. They're, sort of getting rid of all sort of extraneous variables that might be happening. And they're saying, no, this is a causal relationship. So the first article I thought we'd talk about is called Newspaper Closures Polarize Voting Behavior, and it's by Joshua Darr, Matthew Hitt, and Joanna Dunaway.
Ooh. Let me get some of that. Let me get some of that. What do we got?
So this is really good. So what they found was, quick vocab definition, split ticket voting is when you vote for example, a Republican president and a Democratic senator or something like that, right?
Okay, so you're not just voting down the party line.
Exactly.
All D's are all R's, or all of the crazy 9/11 was an inside job candidates.
Exactly. So you're splitting your ticket between 2 parties. So what they found was that with the closure of local newspaper, split ticket voting decreases by a statistically significant margin.
So you see more polarization or more partisan voting.
You're seeing more straight ticket voting.
Gotcha.
You're seeing more. You're seeing people just vote down the party line, right? So they're not. So and what they thought when they found this was that, a couple of reasons. So why is this happening? Voters are becoming less thoughtful. They're becoming less deliberative. They're becoming less informed, and they found actually that what's happening, all of those things, and the mechanism is that voters who have no local newspaper are relying more on national news, and national news is extremely partisan, and therefore they're using these partisan heuristics when they go into the voting booth to vote for these down-ticket local races,
so when you say,
who they might not be as informed about, and they're just saying, okay, well, it's a Republican. I don't
know anything about him. That's my team.
Republicans. That's who I'm going to vote for.
That's my team.
Yeah.
So when you say partisan heuristics, you mean just the notion that their affiliation with a particular political party is all the information they have to go off of, and therefore, and they likely get more partisan information or more partisan coverage from national outlets, and the lack or loss of local coverage with more nuanced or localized focuses tends to increase that polarization.
Well, exactly. And if you think about, your local newspaper or your local radio station or your local even television news outlet around election time is going to do profiles of the local candidates, is going to have interviews,
right?
Might cover some debates that are happening, right? So you just have more information about these local candidates that the national outlets are not going to cover.
Right.
So
they just don't have time. They don't have the time or resources in most cases.
Of course.
Yeah.
So if you're relying on a national outlet for your news, not only are you not getting that information about your local candidates, but the national outlet is likely to be more partisan, right? So you are becoming more partisan in your politics. You have less information about your local candidates, and therefore there's a decrease in split ticket voting.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great summary.
Yeah.
Next,
thanks.
What do we got?
Okay. And then the other article, this is again about the effects of the loss of local news.
Again, wait, before we move on, though, we're talking about newspapers, right? Just papers.
Thank you, yes.
Okay. Because there are some studies out there that conflate newspapers with news coverage. We won't get to that in today's episode. I won't put you on the spot there. But we want to be clear when we're talking about papers. There
are. And actually, one of the interesting things that the second study does is one of the things it looks at is whether non-news papers are filling the void left by newspapers.
I just want to, I got you live right now too. This is so rare for you listening. It's so rare to get Sarah Stonbely on here live.
I try to always do a pre-recorded segment.
I could take this wherever I wanted to go right now.
We're not going there. We're not going there.
All righty, we're going to keep moving.
What do we got? Anything nice to say, don't say it at all, is what I was told when I was growing up.
The Bambi method. Okay. Financing dies in darkness?
The impact of newspaper closures on public finance.
Okay.
I'm probably
Gao et al., right?
Gao, Lee, and Murphy.
Gotcha.
And this, again, is a 2018 paper. and it's a little, it's sophisticated.
This is a thick one.
I'll
this
say
is
it's
a thick
complex.
one. Yeah. This is
because they're looking
dense.
at a lot of different variables. But basically, they wanted to see whether the closure of a local newspaper increased the yield of the municipal bonds held by a municipality. I wanted to mention too. So both of these studies do something really interesting to figure out the causality. They find matching counties using census data.
Yeah.
Where they match like the closure county with the non-closure county on all the relevant demographics to sort of have a comparison. This study does that as well.
I love that because I would want to see that. I would want to know what is Essex County's sister county. Like what is our, you know what I mean? I would love to see dive deeper into that. But we don't have time for that. But keep going.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yes, exactly. So
because that's interesting. That's a really good. I mean, that's one of the best ways we have to do that kind of thing.
And this is why I say it's becoming like its own subgenre because a lot of these similar methods are being used across these different studies.
Many future episodes of Research Corner.
I know. So what they found was that, yes, indeed, they found an increase in the yield of the municipal bonds after the newspaper had closed. They found a lot of other interesting things as well relating to Craigslist. They found that the introduction of Craigslist within a 30-mile radius was the newspaper closure was 10% more likely.
I love this. This is such an interesting thing. I haven't read this
paper.
I usually done my homework. We picked this one last minute,
late in the game. Yeah.
I would love that because the idea that I'm assuming it just means that now there's a section for their town, right?
Right.
Because it's not like Craig Newmark walks in and is like, all right, buddy, here we go, we're setting it up.
No, and they say Craigslist usually chooses like sort of more dense areas.
Right, yeah.
So they controlled for that as well.
Interesting.
It's a really sophisticated
This is thorough.
Study. It's really good.
Props to Gal et al.
So what they attributed this increase in municipal bond yields to, and this is kind of the more important part, was an increase in local government inefficiency. So they found, and the way they studied that was they found that they looked at, after a newspaper closed, what happened to the local government employees' wages? Did they go up or down? What happened to the number of local government employees? Did it increase or decrease? And what happened to the amount of taxes paid into that municipality? Did it go up or down? And they found that all of those, and we can argue this based on like sort of more theoretical, governmental, democratic,
philosophical perspectives here.
The number of the wages increased,
Good.
The number of employees increased, and the amount of taxes paid increased.
So bloat.
Basically bloat is what they're saying. So, I mean, we can
argue
that doesn't
like mean
we need more,
we need more efficient government, really, is what we,
right.
Bigger government or more government. I mean, the wages, I don't have a huge problem with that necessarily.
I know.
But this interesting part, I've read on page 1 in this, in the abstract / executive summary or introduction here, a negative coverage shock, which is sort of when a local newspaper closes. That's an example. And
Craigslist is also one of those coverage
Right, that's
shots.
another. Can lead to a deterioration in the quality of public governance because the local government is no longer being monitored as closely. And this is sort of.
Right.
I love these kind of. A lot of these studies and the sort of cohort that we're looking at today and beyond do sort of put the science or the research to the common assumption. It's sort of been assumed, and journalists and democracy fans alike tend to sort of spout this from the rooftops that journalism is essential to local government and local democracy. It's essential to democracy. And I mean, these study after study, especially in recent year, are bearing that out. These aren't necessarily groundbreaking conclusions. These are more solidifying data that prove the theory.
And I would say that you're exactly right. And they say on page 5, we're talking about the watchdog role of the media.
Yeah.
So really what is happening now is that I'll even like step back and take it like one more step, sort of more abstract, is that, journalism studies, especially with the crisis in news that began in 2008, 2009, more political economists are turning to study news. More media economists are sort of being, entering the field.
The word media economist is becoming even more commonplace.
It's like James Hamilton, those people, and Edwin Baker,
Fiona Morgan.
Yeah, and I would say that like that it's becoming the field itself. The field is gaining more prestige, and therefore we have these more sophisticated studies that can actually prove like watchdog reporting is a good thing. So it's really a good thing. It's just all around, gives us lots of nice sites, gives us lots of nice data.
Yeah.
And I'm really a huge fan.
I would love to see this. I mean, I would love to see this taken even further. I know there are other studies out there, like we've been saying this whole time. There was one I saw, and we don't have time to get into it, that said, the loss of local newspapers results in environmental degradation.
Oh, really?
Local
Do I
environmental.
know that
more
one? I thought you were going to say the Politico one about Trump voting.
Oh no!
This was the Musgrave and Nussbaum in the Politico magazine, I think it was.
Do you have give me a rundown?
Yeah,
I don't think I've managed to dig into that one.
So this was out in 2018. I don't know how rigorous, but it was. They did like sort of do some tests for causality, but they found that counties that had lost their local newspaper had statistically significant higher rates of voting for Trump.
Interesting. Oh yeah, we did. We talked about it very briefly.
Yeah, we didn't print it out or anything, but like you're saying, all of these different effects, are being attributed now to the loss of the local newspaper.
Yeah. Wow. I want to just sit and marinate on that a little bit too, because I think really, I mean, the newspaper. I read something really interesting the other day, and I feel terrible because I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was just an interesting comment about the idea of journalism as an industry and whether or not that should even be the case. In fact, I do remember now. It was an article in Neiman Lab about public funding in Canada, which Canada just pushed their public funding for local journalism. Right. And the idea that journalism is an industry as opposed to a craft is an interesting sort of a denomination there. The author, who I can't remember their name right now, I apologize to them, what was arguing that journalism is a craft. It can be done by anyone, and the important thing is for a government to do, or for a structure to do, it preserve the space for journalism to be done, not necessarily prop up an industry. And hearing these studies and hearing that you describe them reminds me of that, especially when we talk about the distinction between a newspaper and news coverage. I would assume that this applies outside of your sort of traditional connotations of the newspaper being the record, as the entity of record for the town. I would assume this sort of notion applies or will eventually apply to coverage in general, and that it's important not just to keep, we don't take from these studies, well, we need the newspaper necessarily. We need the news coverage, the local coverage, I think is what I'm drawing from this, but I don't know if I'm making too big of a leap there.
Well, I wanted to touch on that as well, because I put a little frowny face on page 22 of this study.
Devastating.
The Gao et al. Because they showed that, oh no, that was for the Craigslist thing. But somewhere else they say that the other outlets that might exist in a town or county that are not newspapers have not picked up the slack as far as they can tell.
Right. Oh, interesting.
And I'm not sure how, I think I'm sure their methodology was sound, but they said, like, the example they gave was a quote from someone who said, like, when I see a Huffington Post reporter at the Baltimore Zoning Board Committee, then I'll know that they're equal. Anyway, but we can get into that another time. But I think that's a really important thing to think about and look further into as well.
That's all the time we have. Sarah Stonbely, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of
pleasure.
Research Corner here on the News Commons Radio Hour, 90.3 WMSC, Auburn, Montclair. Your show is over. We'll see you next week, Thursday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Goodbye.